The coffee cup trembled in Maya Chen's hands as she watched the well-dressed man at table 7 struggle to lift his water glass. It wasn't the tremor itself that made her heart race. She'd seen plenty of customers with shaky hands from too much caffeine or too little sleep. It was the specific pattern, the way his left hand moved in tiny rhythmic circles while his right remained perfectly still. The subtle mask-like expression that hadn't changed despite his obvious frustration. Maya had been waiting tables at Rosie's Diner for 3 years, ever since dropping out of her pre-med program when her father's medical bills consumed their family's savings. But this was different. This was a medical puzzle presenting itself on a Tuesday morning in downtown Seattle, and every instinct she'd suppressed since leaving medical school was suddenly screaming. The man was perhaps 60, with silver hair that caught the fluorescent lights and a navy suit that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. His companion, a younger woman in expensive glasses, was talking animatedly about quarterly projections while he nodded with mechanical precision. But Maya could see what the woman couldn't: the subtle rigidity in his posture, the way he blinked less frequently than normal, the almost imperceptible shuffle in his steps when he'd walk to the table. "Maya, you're staring," whispered Carmen Rodriguez, her best friend and fellow waitress, as she squeezed past with a tray of pancakes. Carmen had been Maya's anchor through the darkest period of her life, when medical school dreams had crumbled and the weight of family responsibility had nearly broken her. "Table 7 giving you trouble?" "No trouble," Maya murmured, but she couldn't look away. The man was trying to sign what looked like important documents, his signature growing smaller and more cramped with each attempt. His companion was growing impatient, checking her phone, tapping perfectly manicured nails against the table's chrome edge. Maya approached their table with the coffee pot, her mind racing through differential diagnoses she hadn't considered in years. Essential tremor? Unlikely. The pattern was wrong. Anxiety? Possibly, but the facial mask suggested something neurological. The combination of symptoms was forming a picture that made her stomach clench with recognition and possibility. If you're enjoying this incredible true story of how one observation changed everything, please take just 2 seconds to hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. It really helps us share these inspiring tales with more people who need to hear them. "More coffee?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. The man looked up, and Maya saw something in his eyes that made her decision for her. Not just frustration, but fear. The kind of fear that comes from knowing something is wrong, but not knowing what. From feeling your body betray you in small ways that accumulate into something terrifying. "Actually," Maya said, setting the coffee pot down and lowering her voice, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you been experiencing any stiffness in your muscles lately, particularly in the mornings?" The woman in glasses looked annoyed. "Excuse me, we're trying to have a business meeting here." But the man raised his hand, slowly, with visible effort. "What did you say?" Maya's heart pounded. She was about to cross a line that could get her fired, could make her look like a complete fool, could destroy what little stability she had managed to build in her post-medical school life. But something in his expression, a flicker of hope mixed with desperation, made her continue. "I'm not a doctor, but I spent 3 years in medical school before I had to drop out. Have you considered that this might be Parkinson's disease?" The silence that followed was deafening. Carmen had frozen behind the counter, coffee pot suspended midair. The businesswoman's mouth fell open. Other customers continued their conversations, unaware that everything in Maya's world had just shifted on its axis. The man was perhaps 60, with silver hair that caught the fluorescent lights and a navy suit that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months. His companion, a younger woman in expensive glasses, was talking animatedly about quarterly projections, while he nodded with mechanical precision. But Maya could see what the woman couldn't: the subtle rigidity in his posture. Maya looked down at the business card, her vision blurring as she read the embossed letters. Reeves Medical Technologies was one of the largest biotechnology companies on the West Coast, worth billions, responsible for breakthrough treatments that had helped millions of patients worldwide. And its founder was sitting in her section, praising a diagnosis she'd made while refilling coffee cups. I could be wrong, Maya stammered. I'm not qualified to. The hell you're not, Dr. Reeves interrupted, his business companion looking between them with growing confusion. What's your name? Maya Chen. Maya Chen, I want to offer you a position at my company. Research analyst, maybe diagnostic specialist. We need minds like yours. The coffee pot slipped from Maya's nerveless fingers, shattering on the linoleum floor in a spray of ceramic and hot coffee. Carmen rushed over with towels, shooting Maya concerned glances. The other customers turned to look. Rosie herself emerged from the kitchen, her weathered face creased with worry about the mess and the disruption. I can't, Maya said automatically, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. I work here. I have responsibilities. My father needs... What kind of responsibilities? Dr. Reeves asked gently. Maya found herself explaining about her family's situation, her father's stroke, the crushing medical bills, and why she'd left medical school. This story gets even more incredible, but before we continue, if this is resonating with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that their dreams aren't over, just delayed. Your share could change someone's life today. Dr. Reeves listened without interruption, his tremor more pronounced now, but his attention absolute. His business companion, introduced as Sarah Mitchell, his head of business development, had put away her phone and was taking notes. Your father, Dr. Reeves said when Maya finished. What kind of stroke? Hemorrhagic, left hemisphere. He lost most of his speech and has partial paralysis on his right side. What hospital is treating him? Harborview, but we can't afford the full rehabilitation program they recommended. Insurance only covers so much, and... Dr. Reeves held up his hand again. Maya, I'm going to make you an offer. You can say no, and I'll walk out of here and never bother you again. But if you say yes, I guarantee it will change your life and your family's life forever. Maya felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, wind rushing past her face, the ground far below both terrifying and full of possibility. Around them, the diner continued its normal rhythm, orders being taken, plates cleared, conversations flowing. But in this small bubble around table 7, the entire trajectory of her future was being rewritten. What kind of offer? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Come work for me. Start as a research analyst. Full salary, benefits, education reimbursement if you want to finish medical school. We'll cover your father's full rehabilitation program, no questions asked. Your brother's college tuition too if he keeps his grades up. Maya's legs suddenly felt weak. She gripped the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. I can't, she said automatically, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. You don't even know me. You don't know if I'm any good at anything other than pouring coffee. Dr. Reeves smiled for the first time since he'd entered the diner, and despite the slight asymmetry caused by his condition, it transformed his entire face. Maya, in 30 seconds, you identified something that 4 specialists missed over 6 months of testing. You saw what they couldn't see because you looked at me as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms on a chart. That's not something you can teach. That's instinct. He stood up slowly, his movements careful and deliberate, and extended his hand. What do you say? Ready to change the world? Maya stared at his outstretched hand, thinking about her father struggling to form words during their weekly phone calls, about her mother's exhausted face when she came home from her double shifts, about her brother Tony's acceptance letter to MIT that they'd had to decline because of financial constraints. She thought about the medical textbooks gathering dust in her childhood bedroom, the dreams she'd carefully boxed away 3 years ago when reality had demanded sacrifice. But she also thought about the fear in Dr. Reeves' eyes when he'd struggled with that signature, about how many other people might be sitting in doctors' offices right now, desperate for answers that aren't coming, about the possibility that her unusual gift, this ability to see patterns that others missed, might actually matter. The diner seemed to hold its breath as Maya reached out and shook Dr. Reeves' hand. His tremor was more noticeable now, but his grip was firm and warm and full of promise. I say yes, Maya said, and felt her entire world shift into a future she'd never dared imagine. Maya's apartment building on Capitol Hill had seen better decades. The paint peeled in artistic strips along the hallway walls, and the elevator had been temporarily out of order for 6 months. As she climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her studio apartment, Dr. Reeves' business card felt like it was burning a hole in her pocket. The elegant weight of the cardstock seemed impossible, too substantial to be real, too thin to hold the weight of everything it represented. She'd asked for 3 days to consider his offer, and Dr. Reeves had agreed with the patient smile of someone accustomed to life-changing negotiations. "Take all the time you need, Maya, but don't take too long. I have a feeling we're going to do great things together." Now, 12 hours later, Maya sat cross-legged on her Murphy bed, surrounded by the scattered remnants of her former life. Medical textbooks stacked like monuments to abandoned dreams. Her father's hospital bills organized in manila folders with labels written in her careful handwriting. Insurance claims, pending. Physical therapy, overdue. Speech therapy, denied. The acceptance letter from UW Medical School, now 3 years old, that she still couldn't bring herself to throw away. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Mija, your father had a good day today. He said Maya very clearly when I showed him your picture. The therapist thinks he's ready for more intensive work, but you know how the insurance is." Maya closed her eyes, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility. One moment, David had been explaining the aerodynamics of flight to 10-year-old Tony over breakfast. The next, he was on the kitchen floor, Elena screaming for an ambulance, while Maya, home from medical school for the weekend, performed CPR with trembling hands. Maya opened her laptop and found herself researching Dr. Jonathan Reeves for the dozenth time that day. The man's biography read like a medical fairy tale. Born in rural Montana, first-generation college student, Harvard Medical School, residency in neurology at Hopkins, but instead of settling into a comfortable practice, he'd walked away at 35 to found Reeves Medical Technologies with a simple mission: democratize diagnostic expertise. The company had developed AI-assisted diagnostic tools that help general practitioners identify rare diseases, portable imaging devices that brought specialist-level technology to rural clinics, and telemedicine platforms that connected patients in medical deserts with expert consultations. In 20 years, RMT had grown from a startup in Dr. Reeves' garage to a company worth $12 billion, with research facilities in Seattle, Boston, and Singapore. But it was the personal details that made Maya's chest tighten with recognition. Dr. Reeves' younger sister had died of a rare autoimmune disease at age 16, misdiagnosed for 2 years because the small-town doctors in Montana had never seen anything like it. By the time she was correctly diagnosed at Mayo Clinic, it was too late. Dr. Reeves had spent his career ensuring that geography and resources would never again be the difference between life and death for patients who simply needed someone to see what others missed. Maya understood that drive. She'd felt it every time she watched her father struggle with exercises that had once been as natural as breathing. Every time her mother's face showed the strain of carrying burdens that should have been shared. The desire to fix things, to make whole what had been broken, to transform suffering into something meaningful. It was the reason she'd applied for medical school in the first place. Her phone rang, breaking the silence of her small apartment. Carmen's name appeared on the screen, and Maya answered with relief. "Girl, you need to tell me everything," Carmen said without preamble. "Rosie's been asking questions all day, and I've been covering for you, but I need to know what's really happening. Did that man really offer you a job?" Maya found herself telling the whole story again, the words feeling more real each time she spoke them. Carmen listened without interruption until Maya reached the part about her father's treatment and Tony's college tuition. "Holy shit, Maya! This is like winning the lottery, except better because you actually earned it." "But what if I can't do it?
What if I've forgotten everything from medical school? What if he expects me to be some kind of genius, and I'm just a waitress who got lucky once? Carmen's laugh was sharp and affectionate. Maya Elena Chen, I have watched you diagnose customers' problems for 3 years. Mrs. Rodriguez's diabetes symptoms before she even knew to get tested? That businessman's heart attack signs that sent him to the ER in time? The college girl's eating disorder that got her into treatment? You think that's normal? You think every waitress walks around seeing what's wrong with people? Maya had never thought about it that way. Those moments had felt natural, instinctive, like noticing that someone seemed sad or tired. She'd always been good at reading people, at seeing the details that others missed. In high school, her friends had joked that she was psychic because she always knew when someone was getting sick before they did. "I'm scared," Maya admitted. "Of course you are. You'd be crazy not to be. But Maya, think about what happens if you don't take this chance. You'll spend the rest of your life wondering, what if? Your father will keep struggling with recovery you can't afford. Tony will end up at community college instead of following his dreams. Your mother will work herself into the ground, and you'll be 40 years old, still pouring coffee, still brilliant, and still wasted."
The truth of Carmen's words hit Maya like cold water. She'd been so focused on the risks of saying yes that she hadn't considered the cost of saying no. After hanging up, Maya made herself a cup of tea, the good stuff her mother had brought from the Filipino market, and sat down with a legal pad. If she was going to make this decision, she needed to be methodical about it. She drew a line down the middle of the page, pros and cons. The pros were obvious: financial security, the chance to help her family, the opportunity to return to medicine through an unconventional path, the possibility of making a real difference in healthcare. But the cons felt heavier somehow. What if she wasn't good enough? What if she made mistakes that hurt patients? What if the corporate world chewed her up and spit her out? What if she was just a curiosity to Dr. Reeves, a pet project that would be discarded when the novelty wore off? Maya's phone buzzed with another text, this one from Tony. "Hey sis, got my SAT scores back, 1480. MIT, here I come. Somehow. LOL." She stared at the message for a long time. Tony was brilliant, had been since he was small, taking apart electronic devices to understand how they worked, building robots from scrap metal, dreaming of designing spacecraft that would take humans to Mars. He'd earned every opportunity that financial constraints had stolen from him. Maya picked up her phone and dialed her parents' number. Her mother answered on the second ring. "Anik, how are you? You sound tired." "Mom, I need to tell you something. Something important happened today." Maya explained the encounter at the diner, Dr. Reeves's offer, what it would mean for the family. Elena listened in silence, occasionally making small sounds of surprise or concern. "Mija," her mother said when Maya finished, "let me put your father on the phone." Maya waited through the shuffling sounds of the phone being transferred, her heart pounding. She and her father had grown closer since his stroke, their conversations necessarily simpler, but somehow more honest. He'd lost much of his vocabulary, but not his ability to understand. And Maya had learned to read the emotions in his voice even when the words came slowly. "Maya," her father said, the word clear despite the slight slur that marked his speech. "Proud of you. Always proud." "Dad, I'm scared. What if I can't do it?" A long pause, then, "Smart girl. Kind heart. You help people. Always help people." David's approval had always meant everything to Maya. He'd been the one to encourage her interest in science, taking her to the Pacific Science Center every weekend when she was small, explaining the exhibits with an engineer's precision and a father's patience.
He'd been the one to suggest she consider medical school when she'd expressed frustration at not being able to fix people's problems the way she could fix broken appliances. "So you think I should say yes?" "Yes," David said without hesitation. "Dream big. Help people dream big." After they hung up, Maya sat in the gathering darkness of her apartment, Dr. Reeves's business card balanced between her fingers. She thought about the path that had brought her to this moment, the sacrifice of medical school dreams, the grinding reality of working multiple jobs, the slow accumulation of small compromises that had reshaped her life into something unrecognizable. But she also thought about the moment in the diner when she had looked at Dr. Reeves and seen not a successful businessman, but a frightened patient in need of answers. That moment when her instincts had overridden her caution, when she had chosen to trust what she saw over what she was supposed to see. Maybe that was her real gift, not just medical knowledge, but the courage to trust her observations even when they led to uncomfortable truths. Maybe Dr. Reeves had seen something in her that she'd been too afraid to see in herself. Maya picked up her phone and dialed the number on Dr. Reeves's business card. It was nearly 9 o'clock, but somehow she wasn't surprised when he answered on the first ring. "Maya," he said, as if he'd been waiting for her call. "Have you made your decision?" "I have," Maya said, her voice stronger than she had expected. "Dr. Reeves, I'd like to accept your offer." The Reeves Medical Technologies campus in South Lake Union looked like something from a science fiction movie. Glass towers stretched toward the Seattle sky, their surfaces reflecting the morning clouds like mirrors of possibility. Maya stood at the entrance, clutching a leather portfolio that Carmen had insisted she buy, feeling like an imposter in her department store blazer and carefully chosen flats. It had been 2 weeks since she had accepted Dr. Reeves's offer, 2 weeks of paperwork and background checks and a whirlwind orientation process that had left her head spinning. Her official title was Diagnostic Research Specialist, though no one seemed entirely sure what that meant. Dr. Reeves explained it simply. "You'll work with our development teams to improve how we identify and diagnose rare conditions. Think of yourself as our human pattern recognition system." Maya's supervisor was Dr. Sarah Kim, a brilliant physician researcher who'd left her cardiothoracic surgery practice to head RMT's diagnostic AI division. Sarah had been politely skeptical during their first meeting, clearly wondering how a medical school dropout with restaurant experience had landed such a prominent position. "Dr. Reeves speaks very highly of your diagnostic instincts," Sarah had said, reviewing Maya's hastily assembled resume. "I'm curious to see how those instincts translate to our research environment." The doubt in Sarah's voice had been unmistakable, and Maya couldn't blame her. On paper, Maya's qualifications were laughably inadequate, but Dr. Reeves had insisted, and Sarah was too professional to openly challenge his judgment. Maya's first assignment was to review case studies from the company's diagnostic AI training database, thousands of patient presentations where the eventual diagnosis was known, but where traditional diagnostic approaches had initially failed. Her job was to identify patterns that might help improve the AI's pattern recognition algorithms. "We're particularly interested in cases where human diagnosticians succeeded where technology failed," Sarah explained, settling Maya into a cubicle near the research team's central workspace. "Dr. Reeves believes there are intuitive leaps that humans make that we haven't been able to replicate algorithmically." Maya spent her first week immersed in medical records, her rusty medical school knowledge slowly returning like muscle memory. Each case was a puzzle. A 43-year-old teacher with unexplained fatigue and joint pain, eventually diagnosed with lupus after 18 months of frustration. A teenager with recurring headaches and vision problems, finally identified as having idiopathic intracranial hypertension after multiple emergency room visits. an elderly man with progressive memory loss that wasn't Alzheimer's, but frontotemporal dementia. The patterns began to emerge by her second week. Maya found herself creating charts and diagrams, mapping out the diagnostic journeys, identifying the moments where physicians had missed crucial connections. She began to see that the delays weren't usually due to incompetence, but to something more subtle, the tendency to see patients as collections of symptoms rather than whole human beings with stories. "Interesting," said Dr. Marcus Webb, the team's senior data scientist, looking over Maya's latest analysis. "You're focusing on psychosocial factors that most diagnostic algorithms ignore." Maya looked up at Marcus, an MIT-educated computer scientist whose office walls were covered with equations she couldn't begin to understand. He'd been politely distant during her first week, clearly skeptical of her presence on his highly technical team. "The lupus patient," Maya said, pointing to her screen. "Every doctor focused on her joint pain and fatigue, but look at this note from her primary care physician 3 months before diagnosis. She mentioned that her symptoms got worse during her divorce proceedings. Stress is a known trigger for autoimmune flares, but everyone treated it as incidental information." Marcus frowned, scrolling through the patient's record. "You're right. The emotional stressor was documented but never integrated into the diagnostic thinking." "It's not just that case. Look at this pattern." Maya pulled up a series of charts she'd created. In 70% of the delayed diagnosis cases involving autoimmune conditions, there was a significant life stressor documented in the 6 months before symptom onset, but in only 12% of cases was that stressor considered relevant to the diagnosis. Dr. Sarah Kim appeared behind them, having overheard the conversation. "That's actually quite compelling," she said, studying Maya's analysis with newfound interest. "Have you quantified the diagnostic delay associated with this pattern?" Maya had. Patients whose emotional stressors were ignored in initial evaluations waited an average of 14 months longer for accurate diagnosis compared to those whose physicians considered the whole clinical picture. "This could be significant," Sarah murmured. "If we could train our AI to weight psychosocial factors more heavily in autoimmune presentations." But Maya's breakthrough discovery came during her 3rd week while reviewing a particularly frustrating case of delayed diagnosis. A 58-year-old architect had spent 2 years seeking treatment for progressive weakness and muscle twitches. He'd been through multiple specialists, extensive testing, and had finally been diagnosed with ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, at a major academic medical center. Something about the case bothered Maya. She'd read hundreds of ALS presentations by now, and while his patient's symptoms were consistent with the diagnosis, something felt off. She found herself studying not just the medical notes, but the photographs that had been included in his diagnostic workup, images of his hands, his posture, his gait. In one photograph taken during a neurology appointment, Maya noticed something that made her heart race. The patient was sitting in the examination room, and behind him, partially visible, was a bookshelf filled with what appeared to be architecture and design books. But it was a small detail in the corner of the image that caught her attention, a framed photograph on the desk showing the patient at what looked like a construction site, wearing a hard hat and work clothes.
Maya began digging deeper into the patient's occupational history, something that had been barely mentioned in his medical records. The architect hadn't just designed buildings, he'd been heavily involved in construction oversight, spending decades on job sites. More specifically, he'd worked on numerous renovation projects involving older buildings. "Oh my God," Maya whispered, her hands shaking as she made the connection. She called up everything she could find about occupational exposures and neurological symptoms. Lead poisoning. The patient's symptoms weren't ALS, they were chronic lead exposure from decades of working in older buildings with lead paint and pipes. The muscle weakness, the cognitive changes, even the specific pattern of symptoms, it all fit. Maya's discovery sent shockwaves through the research team. If she was right, a patient had been misdiagnosed with a terminal illness when he actually had a treatable condition. But more disturbing was the question of how many other similar cases might exist in their database.
"We need to contact the patient's physicians immediately," Dr. Reeves said when Sarah briefed him on Maya's findings. They'd been able to track down the patient through the medical center that had provided the case study, and Maya's suspicions were confirmed through blood and urine testing. The architect's lead levels were dangerously elevated, and chelation therapy had already begun to reverse some of his symptoms. The news created both excitement and tension within the research team. Maya's success was undeniable, but it also raised uncomfortable questions about the expertise of the physicians who had missed such an important diagnosis. "This is exactly why we need fresh perspectives," Dr. Reeves announced during the next team meeting. Maya saw what trained specialists missed because she wasn't constrained by conventional diagnostic algorithms. But not everyone was pleased with Maya's rising profile within the company. Dr. Jennifer Harrison, a senior researcher who joined RMT after 15 years as an emergency medicine physician, had grown increasingly vocal about her concerns. "I appreciate Maya's enthusiasm," Jennifer said during a department meeting, her tone carefully professional but clearly strained. "But I think we need to be careful about drawing broad conclusions from isolated successes. Medical diagnosis is incredibly complex, and there are good reasons why we have standardized approaches to differential diagnosis." But she also remembered the architect, now improving on chelation therapy, who might have spent his remaining years believing he was dying of an incurable disease. "I'm not suggesting we abandon evidence-based medicine," Maya replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm suggesting that our evidence-based approaches might be missing important information because we're not looking at patients holistically." "Holistically," Jennifer repeated, making the word sound somehow dismissive. "Maya, with all due respect, holistic thinking without proper medical training can be dangerous. Patients need systematic, thorough evaluation, not intuitive guesses." The tension in the room was palpable. Maya could see sympathy in some faces, skepticism in others. Dr. Reeves remained silent, watching the exchange with the careful attention of someone evaluating a complex situation. "Dr. Harrison," Maya said, her voice growing stronger, "I agree that patients deserve thorough evaluation, but what if our systematic approaches have blind spots? What if we're so focused on ruling out common diagnoses that we miss uncommon presentations of uncommon diseases?" She pulled up her latest analysis on the conference room screen. "I've been studying our database for 3 weeks now. Do you know what I've found? 43% of delayed diagnoses involve patients whose symptoms don't fit textbook presentations. But our diagnostic algorithms, both human and artificial, are trained on textbook presentations." "That's an interesting observation," said Dr. Michael Torres, the head of clinical research. "Can you elaborate?" Maya had been preparing for this moment, knowing that her credibility within the team would depend on her ability to defend her insights with data. Take fibromyalgia diagnoses. Our AI correctly identifies classic fibromyalgia in 87% of cases, but it misses 62% of cases where fibromyalgia presents with primarily gastrointestinal symptoms rather than musculoskeletal pain. She clicked to the next slide. Or consider autoimmune conditions in elderly patients. Traditional diagnostic criteria assumes symptom onset in younger patients. When the same conditions present after age 70, they're often attributed to normal aging, and diagnosis is delayed by an average of 23 months. The room fell silent as the implications of Maya's analysis sank in. She wasn't just identifying individual diagnostic errors, she was exposing systematic flaws in how the medical system approached complex cases. Dr. Reeves finally spoke. "Maya, I'd like you to prepare a comprehensive presentation of your findings for next month's board meeting. This work could reshape how we train our diagnostic AI systems."
Jennifer Harrison's expression darkened. "Jonathan, I have to express serious concerns about presenting preliminary findings from someone without clinical experience to our board of directors. This kind of work needs to be peer-reviewed, validated by experienced clinicians." "Jennifer," Dr. Reeves interrupted, his voice calm but firm, Maya just prevented a patient from dying believing he had ALS when he actually had a treatable condition. I'd say her work is already validated. The meeting ended with uncomfortable murmurs and strained smiles. As people filed out, Maya overheard fragments of conversation that made her stomach clench. Dangerous precedent. Undermining clinical expertise. What happens when she gets something wrong? Dr. Sarah Kim lingered behind, approaching Maya with a complicated expression. Maya, I want you to know that your work has been impressive, but Jennifer isn't entirely wrong about the political implications of what you're doing. What do you mean? You're essentially arguing that experienced physicians are missing diagnoses that a medical school dropout can identify. Even if you're right, especially if you're right, that's going to create resistance. Some people are going to see your success as an indictment of their competence. Maya felt the weight of that realization. She'd been so focused on the intellectual challenge of diagnostic puzzles that she hadn't considered the professional and personal stakes involved. Every case she solved was, implicitly, a criticism of the physicians who had missed the diagnosis. That evening, Maya called Carmen to process the day's events. I feel like I'm walking through a minefield, she confessed. Every success makes some people more suspicious of me. Maya, do you remember when we were kids and you beat Tommy Rodriguez at chess for the first time? He was 13, you were 10, and he'd been bragging about how girls couldn't play chess. When you checkmated him, he knocked over the board and said you must have cheated because there was no way a little girl could beat him. I remember. This is the same thing, just with higher stakes. Some people can't accept that their assumptions might be wrong, even when the evidence is staring them in the face. But that doesn't make you wrong. It just makes them scared. Maya knew Carmen was right, but the knowledge didn't make the situation easier. She was caught between two worlds, too experienced to be dismissed as a naive outsider, too unconventional to be fully accepted as a peer. Every day brought new discoveries, new insights that could help patients, but also new resistance from colleagues who saw her success as a threat to their own expertise. The breaking point came during her 4th week when Maya identified what she believed was a systematic error in how the company's AI system approached neurological symptoms in women. The algorithm, trained primarily on male presentations of conditions like multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease, was missing female patients whose symptoms manifested differently. This is huge, Maya told Dr. Reeves during an emergency meeting. We could be systematically underdiagnosing neurological conditions in women because our training data has gender bias. Dr. Reeves studied her analysis with the intensity that Maya had learned meant he was seeing the full implications of her discovery. How confident are you in this finding? Very confident. I've identified 17 cases in our database where women with neurological conditions were misdiagnosed because their symptoms didn't match male pattern presentations. 17 confirmed cases of gender bias in our diagnostic AI, Dr. Reeves murmured. If this scales to our entire user base, the implications were staggering. RMT's diagnostic systems were used by thousands of healthcare providers worldwide. If Maya was right, the company might be inadvertently perpetuating diagnostic disparities that affected millions of women patients. But Maya's discovery also created a crisis within the research team. Dr. Harrison, already skeptical of Maya's role, saw this as the final straw. This is exactly what I was afraid of, Jennifer said during the heated meeting that followed Maya's presentation. We're making sweeping claims about systematic bias based on the observations of someone with no clinical experience. Do you understand the legal and regulatory implications if we're wrong? What if we're right? Maya shot back. What if we're perpetuating diagnostic bias and we do nothing about it? The argument that followed was unlike anything Maya had experienced. Voices were raised, accusations made, professional reputations questioned. Maya found herself defending not just her findings, but her right to make them in the first place.
I may not have finished medical school, Maya said finally, her voice cutting through the chaos, but I have something that none of you seem to have, the ability to see patients as human beings instead of data points. And right now, our data is telling us that we're failing women patients. I don't care about politics or professional courtesy. I care about getting the right answers to people who need them.
And have you been doing that? Maya thought about the architect, now improving after months of believing he was dying. About the 17 women whose misdiagnoses she'd identified, whose treatment could now be corrected. About the hundreds of future patients who might benefit from improved diagnostic algorithms. Yes, she said quietly. I think I have. Then stop apologizing for it. Some people are going to be uncomfortable with change, especially when that change challenges their expertise. But that's their problem, not yours. The next morning, Maya arrived at the office early, determined to spend every available hour preparing for the board presentation. She found Dr. Reeves already in the conference room, reviewing financial reports with the focused intensity she'd come to recognize. Maya, good morning. I wanted to talk to you about the presentation structure. He gestured for her to sit down. The board will include physicians, business executives, and investors. Each group will have different concerns about your findings. What kind of concerns? The physicians will want to see robust methodology and statistical validation. The business executives will want to understand the competitive implications, how your insights can differentiate our products in the market. The investors will want to know about liability risks and regulatory compliance. Maya felt overwhelmed. She was comfortable discussing medical patterns and diagnostic insights, but business strategy and legal implications were foreign territory. Dr. Reeves, I'm not sure I'm the right person to present to that kind of audience. Maybe Dr. Kim should... Maya, he interrupted. You are exactly the right person. You discovered these patterns. You understand the implications better than anyone. And frankly, the board needs to see that our most important insights are coming from someone who thinks differently than traditional medical researchers. Over the next week, Maya worked 18-hour days preparing her presentation. Dr. Kim helped her structure the medical evidence, Marcus Webb assisted with the statistical analysis, and Dr. Torres provided guidance on regulatory considerations. Even some of the researchers who had initially been skeptical began offering support, recognizing the significance of Maya's discoveries. The gender bias findings were particularly compelling when presented with rigorous statistical backing. Maya had identified not just 17 individual cases, but a systematic pattern affecting approximately 30% of women with neurological symptoms who used RMT's diagnostic platform. The financial implications were staggering. Potential lawsuits, regulatory investigations, and the cost of retraining AI systems across the entire product line. But Maya had also developed solutions. Working with the development team, she'd outlined modifications to the diagnostic algorithms that could address the gender bias while improving overall accuracy. Her proposed changes would require significant investment, but could position RMT as the first medical AI company to explicitly address diagnostic disparities. This is either going to make your career or end it. There's no middle ground when you're challenging this much established practice. Maya knew he was right. She thought about all the safer paths she could have chosen: staying at the diner, accepting the status quo, building a quiet life within conventional boundaries. But she also thought about her father's words: dream big. Help people dream big. The morning of the board presentation, Maya stood in front of her bathroom mirror, adjusting the professional blazer that Carmen had insisted she buy for the occasion. Her reflection looked older somehow, more serious, marked by the intensity of the past month. She thought about the scared young woman who had dropped out of medical school 3 years ago, convinced that her dreams were too expensive for her family's reality. That woman felt like a stranger now. Maya gathered her presentation materials, checked her phone for messages of support from Carmen and her parents, and headed for the most important meeting of her life. Whatever happened in the boardroom today would determine not just her future, but potentially the future of medical diagnosis for thousands of patients whose condition might otherwise be missed or misunderstood. As she walked through the gleaming corridors of RMT's headquarters, Maya realized that she was no longer fighting just for her own credibility. She was fighting for every patient who had been told their symptoms were atypical, every woman whose pain had been dismissed as emotional, every person whose condition didn't fit neatly into diagnostic categories designed around limited perspectives.
Maya stood at the front of the room, looking out at faces that would judge whether her insights were valuable enough to justify the controversy they had created. She thought about all the patients represented in her data, all the misdiagnosis and delayed treatments and unnecessary suffering that could be prevented if these findings were taken seriously. She opened her laptop, pulled up her first slide, and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "6 weeks ago, I was a waitress at Rosie's Diner. Today, I'm going to show you how someone with my background identified systematic flaws in our diagnostic AI that are affecting thousands of patients worldwide." The boardroom was silent except for the soft hum of the building's ventilation system. Maya clicked to her first slide, a photograph of Dr. Reeves at table 7 in the diner, his hand trembling as he struggled with his signature. This is where it started. Dr. Reeves came to my diner with what he thought were unexplained symptoms. 4 specialists had been unable to diagnose his condition over 6 months of testing. I identified Parkinson's disease in 30 seconds because I saw him as a whole person, not just a collection of symptoms. Board member Dr. Patricia Vance, former chief of neurology at Stanford, leaned forward with interest. "What specifically did you observe that the specialists missed?" The combination was key: unilateral tremor, masked facial expression, micrographia in his signature, and subtle gait changes. But more importantly, I wasn't constrained by the diagnostic algorithms that his physicians were following. They were looking for textbook presentations. I was looking at a frightened man who needed answers. Maya clicked to her next slide, showing her analysis of delayed diagnoses in the RMT database. This experience led me to investigate whether our AI systems have similar blind spots. What I found was disturbing. The data painted a clear picture. 43% of delayed diagnoses involved patients whose presentations didn't match algorithmic expectations. Maya had quantified the human cost, an average of 14.3 months of additional suffering, $47,000 in unnecessary medical expenses per patient, and in some cases, irreversible disease progression while waiting for accurate diagnosis. Dr. Chen, interrupted James Morrison, RMT's chief financial officer, "These are serious allegations about our diagnostic accuracy. Do you have peer-reviewed validation of these findings?" Maya had anticipated this question. "Mr. Morrison, peer review is important, but it shouldn't prevent us from acting on clear evidence of patient harm. I've validated these findings through multiple statistical approaches, and Dr. Kim's team has confirmed the methodology." She clicked to her most compelling case study, the architect misdiagnosed with ALS. Maya walked the board through her discovery process, showing how occupational history had been ignored despite being clearly documented in the patient's records. This man was told he had 18 months to live. He was making end-of-life plans, saying goodbye to his family, preparing for a death that wasn't coming. Our AI missed his lead poisoning because it wasn't trained to consider occupational exposures as primary diagnostic factors. The room erupted in murmurs. Dr. Richard Chen, no relation, RMT's chief medical officer, looked visibly shaken. "What's his current status?" "Improving significantly on chelation therapy. His lead levels have dropped 60% and his neurological symptoms are reversing. He's returned to work and canceled his meetings with hospice care." Maya could see the impact of her words on the board members' faces. This wasn't abstract data anymore.
It was a human being whose life had been transformed by recognizing the limitations of their current diagnostic approach. But Maya's most explosive finding was yet to come. She clicked on the slide that had caused Dr. Harrison's resignation: systematic gender bias in neurological diagnosis. Our AI correctly identifies multiple sclerosis in male patients 87% of the time. In women with identical presentations, accuracy drops to 61%. Board member Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, a prominent neurologist and women's health advocate, sat up sharply. What's the mechanism for this disparity? Training data bias. Our algorithms learned from historical medical records that reflect decades of diagnostic patterns that underestimated neurological symptoms in women. The AI isn't intentionally discriminating, it's perpetuating historical discrimination. Maya showed slide after slide of evidence. Women with Parkinson's disease whose symptoms were attributed to anxiety. Women with multiple sclerosis whose fatigue was dismissed as depression. Women with epilepsy whose seizures were classified as conversion disorders.
This affects approximately 30% of women using our diagnostic platform for neurological symptoms, Maya continued. We estimate that our current AI systems have contributed to diagnostic delays for over 12,000 women patients in the past 2 years. The legal and financial implications hit the room like a physical force. General Counsel David Park was already taking notes, his expression grim. Dr. Chen, are you saying we have potential liability for thousands of misdiagnoses? I'm saying we have an opportunity to fix a systematic problem before it causes more harm, Maya replied, and I have solutions. She outlined her proposed changes to the diagnostic algorithms, modifications that would weight psychosocial factors more heavily, account for gender differences in symptom presentation, and incorporate occupational and environmental history into differential diagnoses. The changes would require significant investment, but could improve diagnostic accuracy by an estimated 23%. The cost of implementing these changes would be approximately $47 million, Maya said, addressing the financial concerns directly. The cost of not implementing them, in terms of lawsuits, regulatory action, and damage to our reputation, could be 10 times that amount. Dr. Reeves, who had remained silent throughout Maya's presentation, finally spoke. Maya, beyond the legal and financial considerations, what do you see as the broader implications of your findings? Maya paused, thinking about everything that had brought her to this moment. Her father's stroke, her abandoned medical school dreams, her instinctive recognition of Dr. Reeves' condition, the countless patients represented in her data. Dr. Reeves, I think we have a choice. We can continue developing AI systems that replicate the limitations and biases of historical medical practice, or we can create something better. We can build diagnostic tools that see patients the way the best physicians do, as complex human beings whose stories matter as much as their symptoms. She clicked to her final slide, which showed a simple question: what if AI could be more human than humans? Traditional medical education teaches physicians to be systematic, to follow algorithms, to minimize intuitive leaps that might lead to errors. Those are valuable skills, but they can also create blind spots. AI has the potential to combine systematic analysis with pattern recognition that considers the full complexity of human experience. Board member Dr. Michael Kim, a prominent investor in healthcare technology, leaned back in his chair with a thoughtful expression. Dr. Chen, you're essentially proposing that we redesign our core diagnostic platform based on insights from someone with no formal clinical training? That's either brilliant or reckless. It's both, I admitted. But so was every major advance in medical history. Someone had to be willing to challenge established practice when the evidence showed it wasn't working. The questions that followed were intense and probing. Board members challenged her methodology, questioned her statistical analysis, and pressed her on implementation details.
Maya answered each question with growing confidence, supported by weeks of rigorous preparation and the unshakable conviction that her findings could save lives. Dr. Patricia Vance was particularly thorough in her questioning. Dr. Chen, I've reviewed your background. You completed 2 years of medical school before dropping out for financial reasons. How do we know that your insights aren't simply the result of incomplete medical education that hasn't been constrained by clinical experience? The question was pointed, but not hostile. Maya recognized it as the kind of challenge that came from genuine concern rather than professional jealousy. Dr. Vance, you're absolutely right that my perspective is shaped by incomplete formal training, but I think that's exactly why I was able to see these patterns. I wasn't trained to dismiss certain observations as unimportant. I wasn't socialized to prioritize algorithmic thinking over holistic assessment. Maya pulled up a comparison slide she'd prepared for this exact question. Look at diagnostic accuracy rates among physicians at different career stages. Residents in their first year of training have surprisingly high diagnostic accuracy for complex cases, higher than third-year residents who have learned to follow established protocols more rigidly. You're suggesting that medical education actually impairs diagnostic thinking? I'm suggesting that medical education optimizes for certain types of diagnostic thinking while potentially inhibiting others. What if we could preserve the pattern recognition abilities that come naturally while adding the systematic knowledge that comes from training? The discussion that followed was unlike anything Maya had experienced. 23 of the most accomplished people in healthcare and business were seriously debating ideas that had originated from her observations as a waitress. The surreal nature of the situation wasn't lost on her, but she found herself fully engaged in the intellectual challenge.
CFO James Morrison raised the concern that Maya had been dreading. Dr. Chen, even if your analysis is correct, how do we implement these changes without acknowledging that our current systems have been systematically flawed? The regulatory and legal implications could be devastating. Mr. Morrison, we have a choice between acknowledging flaws that we're actively addressing and having those flaws exposed by external investigators or competitors. I'd rather control that narrative by leading the industry in diagnostic equity. Dr. Rodriguez nodded approvingly. That's actually a strong competitive position. If we can demonstrate superior diagnostic accuracy for underserved populations, it differentiates our platform significantly. Maya realized that the conversation was shifting from whether her findings were credible to how they should be implemented. The recognition felt surreal and terrifying. Her insights were being taken seriously by people whose decisions would affect millions of patients. The moment that would define everything came when Dr. Reeves asked the question Maya had been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. Maya, if the board approves implementation of your recommendations, would you be willing to lead the Diagnostic Equity Initiative? The room fell silent. Maya understood the magnitude of what was being offered, the chance to reshape medical AI on a global scale, to ensure that her insights would be translated into tools that could help patients worldwide. But she also understood the risks. Leading such an initiative would put her at the center of controversy within the medical establishment, subject to scrutiny and criticism from physicians who saw her as an unqualified outsider. Maya thought about her father, now making steady progress in the rehabilitation program that RMT's insurance was funding, about her brother Tony, whose MIT acceptance letter was no longer gathering dust because tuition was no longer an insurmountable obstacle, about her mother, Elena, who had cried with relief when Maya's salary made it possible for her to reduce her hours and spend more time supporting David's recovery. But most of all, she thought about the patients. The women whose neurological symptoms would be taken seriously, the elderly patients whose conditions wouldn't be dismissed as normal aging, the people whose occupational exposures would be considered in their diagnostic workups. Dr. Reeves, Maya said, her voice clear and steady,
I would be honored to lead that initiative. The vote that followed was closer than Maya had hoped, but decisive enough to feel like vindication. 18 votes in favor of implementing her recommendations, with 5 abstentions. The Diagnostic Equity Initiative would be funded with an initial budget of $50 million, making it one of the largest single investments in RMT's history. As board members filed out of the conference room, many stopped to congratulate Maya or ask follow-up questions about implementation timelines. Dr. Patricia Vance lingered longest, her expression thoughtful. "Dr. Chen, I want you to understand something. What you've accomplished here today is remarkable, but it's also going to make you enemies. There are people in the medical establishment who see your success as a threat to everything they've worked for." "I understand, Dr. Vance. I don't think you do, not fully, but I also don't think that should stop you. Medicine needs people who can see what others miss, who aren't constrained by conventional thinking. Just be prepared for the backlash." After the boardroom cleared, Maya found herself alone with Dr. Reeves. He was gathering his papers with the same careful movements she'd first noticed in the diner. His Parkinson's symptoms now managed with medication, but still subtly present. Dr. Reeves, he was gathering his papers with the same careful movements she'd first noticed in the diner. His Parkinson's symptoms now managed with medication, but still subtly present. "Maya, I have a confession to make," he said without looking up. "When I walked into Rosie's diner that morning, I wasn't just another customer. I've been watching you." Maya's stomach clenched. "What do you mean?" "Sarah Kim had mentioned you in passing, said there was a waitress at a local diner who had an unusual ability to spot health problems in customers. I was intrigued, especially given my own diagnostic challenges, so I decided to see for myself." The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. "You mean the whole thing was a test?" "Parkinson's is real, and my symptoms were genuinely undiagnosed. But my choice to eat at Rosie's that morning was not random. I wanted to see if the stories about your observational abilities were true." Maya felt a mixture of emotions: betrayal, relief, confusion, admiration. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to see how you'd respond under natural conditions. If you'd known I was evaluating you, it would have changed everything. Maya, you passed a test that you didn't even know you were taking, and you did it by being exactly who you are." Dr. Reeves stood slowly, his movements deliberate and careful. "I've built my career on identifying talent that others overlook, on finding solutions that conventional approaches miss. But you're the most remarkable find of my career. What you've accomplished in 6 weeks, the insights you've generated, the systematic problems you've identified, it's unprecedented."
Maya felt overwhelmed by the recognition, by the magnitude of what had just transpired, by the realization that her life had been fundamentally altered by a conversation that had started with a trembling coffee cup. "Dr. Reeves, what happens now?" "Now you change the world," he said simply. "You build the diagnostic tools that you wish had been available when your father had his stroke, when patients like me were struggling with undiagnosed conditions, when anyone who needed answers couldn't get them from conventional medicine." As Maya rode the bus home that evening, she found herself staring at her reflection in the window, trying to reconcile the person she'd been that morning with who she'd become by sunset. She was now the director of diagnostic equity for one of the world's largest medical technology companies, responsible for reshaping how artificial intelligence approached human health. 6 months later, Maya stood in the same RMT conference room where she'd presented to the board, but this time she was briefing physicians from around the world on the success of the Diagnostic Equity Initiative. The new AI algorithms had improved diagnostic accuracy for women by 34%, reduced misdiagnosis rates for occupational diseases by 41%, and helped identify over 3,000 previously missed conditions. But the moment that mattered most came when Dr. Reeves showed her a letter from the architect,
now fully recovered from lead poisoning, back to designing buildings and eternally grateful to the waitress who had saved his life by seeing what others missed. Maya's phone buzzed with a text from her father. "Mija, so proud. You help people dream big." His speech therapy was working. The words came clearer now, thanks to the treatment her new position had made possible. She smiled, realizing that sometimes the most extraordinary journeys begin with the simplest act of caring enough to really see another person. From a trembling coffee cup to transforming medical diagnosis worldwide, all because she'd trusted her instincts and dared to speak up when it mattered most. Maya's journey from waitress to medical innovator proves that sometimes the most important insights come from the most unexpected places. If this story inspired you to trust your instincts and pursue your dreams, please like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe for more true stories of people who refuse to give up. Your support helps us tell these life-changing stories that remind us all what's possible when we dare to see what others miss.